I've always seen it like a sponge. When you go to work, when I go to work, I want to squeeze it until it's completely dry and leave everything on the dance floor and then walk away, should be exhausted, and let then wonderful editors and people come in and work with the material. Then I want to go and let that sponge kind of refill with water. And that water is often to do with being outside and in nature. It's definitely a wide range of reading. I'm a voracious reader. So, and fiction, nonfiction, biography, everything. So that on some level, all of this stuff is refilling that sponge and enabling you to draw on a richer reservoir.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Rupert Friend is an actor. He sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work. Do you have a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new character? Is there a typical first step?
For me, I think the most important thing that an actor has in their arsenal is instinct. So there is, for me, and it's an old adage, there's no second chances at first impressions. So the very first time that I read a script is incredibly sacrosanct for me. I don't want to watch anyone else's interpretation of the role. I don't want to read the book it was based on. I don't want to see spin-offs, prequels, sequels, anything. I want to be alone, quiet, and allow those instincts to speak. And so when that happens, there's normally a very strange thing when it works. Oftentimes you read the thing and you think nothing's happening. I'll just politely pass. But when a strong either image or sound or sequence comes into your head and it's visceral, like a dream you can still remember when you wake up, then I know that we haven't by any means done the work. We haven't even started, but we should start. And that's the beginning of the process. Then begins, depending on the project, if it's historical, there might be, a lot of research onto what actually happened. If it's from a universe that already exists, there'll be research around the rules and pre-existing circumstances of that universe. If it's a complete flight of fancy, then I might call the director and say, listen, I can hear this voice, this accent or this intonation or this. There's a way of that this person might, use their body, and I just want to know: am I completely left of center, or are you down? And then this wonderful kind of treasure hunt begins, where it's almost like the character's already there, and you are clearing the muck off a window pane to be able to see them more clearly. And eventually, if you're really lucky, you open the window and they come in.
I guess it's really important. I mean, to continue with your analogy there, like you want to make sure in that first instinctual reading, you want to make sure that you're not that something else isn't interfering with your connection to the material, right? I mean, that's why you're saying you call it sacrosanct, but you want to be pure, so you can let that stuff happen and that kind of fog fill that window.
Yeah, because the next guy would have a completely different interpretation, which might be more valid or more interesting. But the fact of the matter is, all of us are completely different. So it's I forget the exact quote, but paraphrasing Martha Graham, there's only one of you. So for you to filter the universe through the unique you that is you is enough. It's already going to be original because it's coming through you. And I think for me to expand on that a little bit, it's less like architecture and more like archaeology. So I don't see it as, you have to necessarily build something. You have to uncover something that's already there.
You're a master of the analogy.
Some would say that I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm reaching for metaphor.
But these are working, because I know exactly what you're saying. Because so many people talk about scaffolding and building, and maybe that works for them, and that, right, that's okay. But this is you're using different muscles when you're uncovering, right? I mean, you're dusting off the. But I also heard that you wanted to be an archaeologist when you were a kid, though. Is that why?
No, that's gotten misconstrued over the years. I wanted to be Indiana Jones. This is very different. When he's in university, he has girls batting their eyes at him. He doesn't really do very much else. Then he's out there punching Nazis and finding their treasures and hanging off tanks. That's what I wanted to do.
That's right.
And have a whip and a leather jacket and a hat.
If they had expanded that first act and showed all the stuff he does, you wouldn't want to be him.
Yeah, I don't want to be marking 350 essays on, ancient Roman ruins. Thank you very much.
It's so interesting to find out, though, and tell me if this is misconstrued, that you didn't know anything about film acting in your first job. You didn't know what a call sheet was. You didn't know what marks were for.
Right. And the biggest one was continuity. That was such a mind fuck to me. That a very kind fellow actor. Each time we did it, I presumed I was doing something wrong. So I'd pick the cup up and throw the liquid over my shoulder, and then I'd suddenly shout something, and then I'd stand up, and he's like, "You're gonna have to stick to something because we're gonna turn around." And I was like, "We all turn around? We on the spot? Why did we do that? Is it like a sort of incantation or something?" No. The cameras will all turn around. I didn't even realize I wasn't even on camera. It was over my shoulder. It was an over, but I didn't know what that was. So I had zero training in that.
So what was given to you by having this zero foundation? You know what I mean? There must be something. I guess what I'm getting at is there must be something that you can pinpoint is like maybe you trust the process more because you had no foundation and you learned everything on the go. Or maybe you're more fearless. Because of the mistakes that or all that, is there something you can?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me, I think it's served me my whole life, is I'm not afraid to say I don't know. Yeah. And I think a lot of people come into whether this discipline or any other with all the answers, and then if you feel that way, you're guaranteed not to learn anything. And I've always maintained to this day I don't really know anything. So when people, want to impart knowledge or want to let you experiment or play, or the biggest one for me is let you fail safely, that is just a gift. So whether that's a film set where doesn't matter, we can do another take. No one will ever see that. Whether it's an acting school where you're terrible, but it doesn't matter. The agents and audience and whatever reviewers didn't ever and will never see it. I think that's the greatest gift you can give to someone who's learning, is to say, make all the mistakes you want. Don't stop experimenting, because when you experiment and you risk, you have a chance to do something original. If you don't do those things, you can only ever hope to repeat things.
So can you pinpoint an approach that kind of worked for you that you developed over time? Because even on series, like you're on Homeland for a number of seasons, so you had a steady diet of being in front of the camera a lot. Did you start to develop a way of doing this that worked for you, or do you kind of begin again every time and kind of see based on the character what you need and what works best?
Definitely, each project is a different set of rules or approaches or challenges, for sure. There's not one. I don't have a method. I don't have a process per se, but I did find that there was something which happened, took me by surprise when it first happened on that very first film that you're talking about, The Libertine, with Johnny Depp and John Malkovich and Samantha Morton. And it was this: in between the words action and cut, all the cameras and crew and equipment disappeared. It was like a Brigadoon reverse moment.
Yeah.
And what was left was the reality of, in that case, 17th century England, and a bordello and a monkey or whatever it was, and you were who you thought you were, and the other people were who they thought they were, and there were no trailers or modern day actors playing it. And then when the word cut, came in, all the cameras and everything else kind of reappears. And I can liken it when people say, well, that seems to be a bit of a imagination feat. And I suppose it is, but to me, it's not really any different than when a singer goes on stage and says, thanks so much for coming. So nice to see you all. 1, 2, 3. And on 4, I see that happen to them. Yeah. And they are singing, when they're good, from a place of, they re-go wherever they went when they first wrote the song or heard the song. And for 3.5 minutes, they are completely inside that world. And then the final note comes and they open their eyes and smile and say, thanks so much for my next song. In that 3.5 minutes, I believe they go somewhere else.
Yes.
So to me, that's the only thing that's consistent in film acting for me, is that the approach tends to change.
What do you think that is? Is that a gift that you have? Is that something that you develop somehow in your youth?
I think everybody has it. And I think we're all born with it. And I think it's sort of drummed out of us by so-called adult life or citizenry or whatever. And I remember there's a scene in the film Hook, which you may remember from whenever it was, 20 years ago. And they take now grown-up Peter Pan, Robin Williams, to a so-called feast in the forest with the Lost Boys. And he looks at this table and says, that's just an empty table. And all the Lost Boys look at him in horror because he's forgotten how to imagine. And then later in the film, he comes back and he sees it, and the most incredible feast is laid out. And this slow smile spreads across his face, and it's almost as if he's regained the powers of imagination. And I don't think you regain them. I think you just have to, or rather you can regain them. But the trick, if there is such a thing, is to try not to let them go in the first place. Because there's no kid who doesn't sit under the table and say, I'm in a castle or an igloo or a fort or something. So we all are born with those skills, and they lead some people to invent the internet or the Empire State Building or whatever it is. And we in our profession are lucky enough to get to use them continually, to the point where you can say, well, I'm not actually, to reference Homeland, from America or a black ops assassin, nor have I ever killed anyone.
Yeah.
So how do you do all that? Imagination.
Yes. It must be quite a dual kind of existence on something like Obi-Wan, where it's like the ultimate child's play. Right. But at the same time, you're wearing all of this stuff that probably, after 8 hours is so hard to, I'm just imagining here, to keep that kind of childlike aspect going and stay in the zone of that. Am I hitting it?
Physical kind of endurance is certainly part of it. Whether you've seen plenty of action films, people are up to their necks in freezing cold, brackish water, or they're, by a volcano and sweating or whatever it is. And yeah, you're right that some costumes and makeup are physically very uncomfortable. And then there is definitely a kind of, you have to transcend that. And having, moments of play between the filmed moments is super important, particularly if the subject matter is kind of heavy. For something like Star Wars, which, as you said, is kind of the ultimate sandbox in many levels, because it's this incredibly well-realized universe that's beloved by so many people. And these characters feel completely real, even though they have never actually existed other than in these films and television shows. Yet we feel we know them, and some of these species have become as intricately kind of known as the human race to real diehard fans. Yeah. And I think it's, sometimes talk about it in terms of sports, when you're really hurting as let's say a boxer, you learn to relax in between the punches, so that for the punch, you've got everything behind it. But if you kept that tension when you're still moving around each other in the ring, you'd be exhausted in 3 minutes, because it's not possible. So learning to modulate your energies is, as a young actor, I would sometimes make the mistake of you doing a night shoot, for example, which typically starts at 5 or 6 in the evening and runs till 6 or 7 in the morning. So lunch, quote unquote, comes at 1 in the morning, and someone would bring out a whole plate of pasta and you're tired and you're hungry and you're cold, you wolf it down. Well, now you're exhausted for an hour digesting an enormous bowl of pasta. So you sort of learn, okay, much as I would love that, it's not my job to go and have a nap after that. It's my job to be ready for anything. And they could suddenly pull a scene from the end of the thing where you're, emotionally distraught, or you have to run up a mountain or something that requires a lot of energy, and you're now bloated and sort of soporific. That's your fault.
Yeah.
So I learned that stuff quite early by trial and error, the managing of energies.
And, in the very beginning of this series, you have I think it's a really important, it's like the first scene, and it's very exposition heavy. You didn't play like the menace. And you didn't play the exposition. You know what I mean? I don't know how you did it. How did you approach that? Like, because it's almost like a monologue in a way, right?
Yeah, it's a big old, and if you were looking at it as a monologue, I think you'd probably be off on the wrong foot.
Right.
Because there's that old adage in acting that, your character doesn't know what's going to happen next. Your character hasn't read the whole script.
Yeah.
Your character is in each moment as it unfolds, and they may have a plan. But one of the things that I was looking at was people who had felt genuinely powerful to me. And genuine, true power, in my experience, does not come in a demonstrative way. There are plenty of chest thumpers out there. There are plenty of people swinging muscles and flashing their credit cards and showing you how much of this or that they've got. They tend to be the opposite to my mind.
Yes.
And the truly powerful, it's like the truly knowledgeable. If you speak French, you don't need to drop French words in all the time. You just know you speak French. It's not something you need to tell me.
Right.
And so if you truly are the most dangerous person in the galaxy, more or less, you don't need to threaten folks or brandish your offensive weapon or your menace or whatever. And instead, you're going to focus on what is your objective, to use another acting word. Yeah. And this guy I found so interesting because unlike, say, Reva, whose impatience, as we see, kind of gets the better, and she just wants, just find the Jedi and move on. This is boring. And this guy, there was a line in the script, loves the sound of his own voice. And I thought the idea of someone who is the most feared menace, to use your word, in the galaxy, but actually wants to take the time to hear how eloquent he is for his own enjoyment.
Yes.
I just thought that is such an interesting and very atypical thing. Baddies oftentimes kind of say things that are supposed to scare you or remind you of how powerful they are. This guy just wanted to expound on stuff. And I think if he hadn't been stopped, he would have given a full-on half-an-hour lecture rambling on all different kinds of subjects.
Yeah.
And probably encouraging a little applause and maybe some laughter at times, but in that way that we do when we're scared.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you hit on like something that served you and that's coming out of the script.
This is where I think writing and screenwriting in particular is such an art, because it feels to me, the famous sort of Hemingway philosophy of when you're writing, it's like an iceberg. You should see only the tip. You should read or hear only the tip, but you must know the 99% of it that's beneath the water. We don't need to talk about it, but we know it's there. And I think great screenwriters, they do all their homework, they do their backstories, they probably overwrite the first couple of drafts, then they trim and edit and cut and allow for the actors, the director, the camera, the composition, the score, the editing to all create the story as well. So what it feels to me is like they leave kind of Hansel and Gretel crumbs. And that one was a crumb, which then blew and expanded in my mind. I heard this voice. And then what happens is it plays into the scene, because he's also in that scene noticing, for example, lightsaber scars on the wall, which tend to mean something. He's also trying to look into people's eyes and see if anyone's flinching, is anyone hiding. But if he just did that, it would be so boring.
Right.
So that is kind of underneath this, I thought, far more interesting surface thing of someone who has to ride in a spaceship for light years on end with two quite dry people. And there's no TV, and he's entertaining himself.
It's so great that people can see another performance of yours right now on Netflix in Anatomy of a Scandal that's so totally different from this. I mean, existing on television, quote unquote, at the same time. James Whitehouse here, this character, I was thinking about it. It actually scared me a little bit, talking to actors and having over time this idea that this can actually be mentally harmful if you're doing it wrong. The reason why I'm bringing it up here is because I was thinking about if I had approached this character, the idea of like having to get into somebody who's either lying to themselves or lying for real, and having to live the lie. Mm-hmm. I could imagine that is actually to the actor, to the person, actually detrimental to your mental, maybe I'm reading that into it because I don't know how to do that and I have never done it. But I want to know, I mean, I heard that you were a little bit apprehensive about the role kind of because of these reasons. But tell me about how you approached that with this character and having to find the empathy, I guess, with him, which is, I guess, what everyone has to do, right? When they're playing somebody.
Yeah, I mean, okay, a couple of things. First of all, the apprehension about the role wasn't so much to do with lying, because I think that humans have a flexible relationship with the truth at the best of times. So I doubt it didn't turn me off. It was more that when I got into acting, it was to explore worlds that attracted me, which I possibly would not otherwise have gotten to explore, and as many and as diverse a range as possible. So I did want to be on the prairie one day and the courtroom the next, for example. I didn't want to just do one of those things. And this world of, conservative, elitist British politics was not one that was on my bucket list. So that was the main kind of aversion that I had to it. And I found the character, his choices and all that pretty sort of odious. Mm-hmm. It's another maxim of acting, that you don't judge your character. Yes. Because if you're judging your character while you play them, then you're sort of commenting on it, and it will never be truthful, because we'll feel Peter's opinion about the character, and the character's never met Peter.
Right.
So the secret here to unlocking this one, for me anyway, was that he has gotten to the place where he no longer, or never has thought, he is lying. This is not someone who considers himself mendacious or underhand in any way. It's someone who considers himself, to use a sort of Trumpian phrase, a winner at life.
Yes.
But unlike Trump, isn't kind of bombastic about it. He's just looking around himself and seeing the beautiful family and the successful political rise, and his best friend's the leader of the country. He's got a couple of houses, a couple of cars, a couple of horses, a couple of dogs. And it's sort of like, why on earth would that guy sit down and question himself? Yeah. What's he got to feel badly about or lacking in? And I thought that is actually something which is potentially way more dangerous even than the kind of classic Nazi or whatever a baddie we might think of. Because these guys and girls who don't ever question themselves move through the world with impunity and without accountability. And that can turn into some pretty horrific consequences, as we sometimes see in world leaders. And I thought that's a really interesting thing to explore, especially when the 1% of people who wield the power typically have this in common with one another. Yes. A lack of reflection, a lack of self-examination or accountability. And it's the most, I think, possibly the most dangerous trait.
I spent a little time on a television set last month as an extra because it was multiple days, and it was a scene that seemed like I was just going to be sitting down around food. And I thought, this will be easy. I'll make a little money doing nothing.
Free lunch.
Reading my book most of the time. Yeah. And long story short, it was the exact opposite. And it was terrible. But I learned a lot because, usually I'm on very small sets, my independent friends making things. And sometimes I act in things and I'm literally recording the sound while I'm acting. That's how small it is. Or I'm doing the camera and the sound, stuff like this is how small. So it was interesting to see a gigantic set of hundreds of people, extras and crew. And one of the things that was really scary to me was that the director at one point was behind the monitor. A scene was taking place and he was texting.
Oof.
And the actor walked over to where the monitor was and had to actually ask for, like, how was that?
Wow.
Like,
the thing is, it makes me sad that because, I don't know the scenario. Maybe his wife was ill, for all I know.
Right.
So it could have been that. But let's just say it wasn't, and he was doom scrolling or Instagramming or something, or, the sad part is that the work is not fulfilling enough. I mean, directing is a dream job for so many people, and it's very hard to get into. And there's only one of them on a set of 150 people. And the idea that the work is so unprepossessing or uninteresting to you that your phone holds your attention more readily.
Yes.
It's really sad. I actually had a director once who I had a similar thing. I kind of wanted to check, what did they think? And they had headphones on. So I spoke into my microphone, nothing. And I went over and he was listening to house music while watching the scene. When it wasn't even an action scene, it was a talking scene. So then you think, so not only can you not hear it, it's not even coming through your hand. You're intending to play this as a music video.
Oh my God.
But a 2-hour music video has never been made for good reason. It would be very dull. And it's a shocking thing, but unfortunately it does tell you everything you need to know compared to the director, who, to any of the greats that I've worked with. Wes Anderson, I just finished my 3rd collaboration with, who is so interested to talk to you about every comma, every gesture, every prop, the color scheme and why it matters. And I could do that all day. Yeah. And to me, we are in a collaborative business. We are not sitting in a room painting or making poetry on our own. We are in a business where we make art en masse. So the idea that we isolate ourselves feels contrary to that.
Yes. And, that's why I was bringing this up, because I wanted to ask you what kind of director works best for you. Like, what are some of the qualities that work for you? Obviously, we're establishing that, being distracted is not a good quality, but there are a series of other kind of qualities that work for some people better than others. Like some people need somebody to be kind of hands-on, and some people need people to be more hands-off. I was wondering if you kind of established a certain thing that works best for you.
Well, to come back to our earlier discussion, each project is its own thing, and you'll have directors who, Deb Chow, for example, completely trusted me to go away and find this guy. And others have a very exacting vision, which is also completely fine. I think communication is huge. Folks that don't want to or care to communicate with anyone, it's a difficult thing to be in charge of anywhere from, as you said, 10 folks to 200. If you can't communicate with them, it's possibly not the right job, because everyone from the production designer to the boom swinger needs to know your opinion about what they should do and where they should be and all of that. But it sounds like a little bit of a kind of get out, but it is a kind of a case-by-case basis, because I've had wonderful experiences with incredibly exacting directors and wonderful experiences with those that want to leave me to it. I always think ideas, if you're threatened by ideas, I always find that a bit troubling, because the director is captaining the ship and ultimately should decide. But I would feel, bring all the ideas and then I'll decide. But if you find the bringing of the ideas from people threatening or in some way obstructionist, I see that as missed opportunity.
Do you have something that you do when you're not working to kind of keep your inner actor fed actors can't work all their muscles like other artists do alone,
Right.
So
We can't just bang out a painting and try out a new
Yeah.
technique.
Yeah.
You can't just do a monologue in the corner of the room. I suppose you could, but okay. So for me, the good actors, the ones I look up to, are the curious actors. They're the ones who have many, many other interests and passions outside of the work, because I've always seen it like a sponge. When I go to work, I want to squeeze it until it's completely dry and leave everything on the dance floor, and then walk away, should be exhausted, and let then wonderful editors and people come in and work with the material. Then I want to go and let that sponge kind of refill with water. And that water is often to do with being outside and in nature. It's definitely a wide range of reading. I'm a voracious reader. So, and fiction, nonfiction, biography, everything. So that on some level, all of this stuff is refilling that sponge and enabling you to draw on a richer reservoir. Music, obviously, film. I'm very, very into food. So where and how food is grown and cooked and served, and who's doing that, myself included, my wife, my friends, great chefs, all of that. I just feel like if you are curious about the world, it's probably because you're present in it. And presence is what that director who was texting was unable to achieve when he was helming a TV program, or the director I worked with the music wasn't actually there. He was already in the edit, and that doesn't work. Come with an idea of your edit, sure, but in the moment, be in the moment. And I think the greatest actors are in the moment. And that's what we lean into when we watch them on screen or stage, is this completely hypnotic, some people call it stage presence, charisma, whatever, presence. Patsy Rodenberg, the great voice and acting teacher from England, one of the greatest living, talks about first, second, and third circle, which if you haven't read her book, maybe you have.
Second circle, yeah.
Yeah, and very, very, paraphrasing her, because it's her life's work. If first circle is a kind of inward to self energy, and third is a kind of pushed outward aggressive energy. If you're in second circle with someone, you are present with them. You neither foist yourself upon them, nor do you apologize. You are with them, you're receptive, and you respond with a yes and. So improvisers work in second circle. So to me, the practice is, I think, being present in whatever activity draws your curiosity, and at work. And then that, I think, feeds into the work.
Rupert Friend, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.